Hi, I'm Abby. I have a lot of records, and this is Vinyl Monday. Please don't send me back to Switzerland. I don't know how to ski. So welcome back, or welcome if this is your first time here. Vinyl Monday is the series where once a week I sit down and just talk about a classic album I love. If 30-minute episodes aren't your thing, don't worry. I also do Vinyl Monday in 60 seconds, both here on my channel and over on my Instagram. Before we start this week's episode, mark your calendars for this Wednesday, August 30th at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'll be appearing on a live podcast for the very first time. What could possibly go wrong? The guys of the Material Issues podcast here on YouTube have so kindly invited me onto their show. We're gonna be talking music, we're going to be talking the channel, and since it's live, who knows where the night will take us. It'll be on their channel, Material Issues. I'll have it linked below. If you hit the subscribe button and hit the bell next to the subscribe button, you'll be notified when we go live on Wednesday. I can't wait to see you there. For the last regular episode of Vinyl Monday before the season finale next week, I can't believe we've already gotten through 2 seasons of this nonsense. We will be celebrating another album anniversary. I've done a few 30th, a 25th, a 10th, but this week we're celebrating the 50th birthday of Goat's Head Soup by the Rolling Stones. Congrats to those who guessed this one. Remember, if you want to play along, all you gotta do is check out my community tab. That's where I post my hints for what next week's album is gonna be. I host polls over there. It's a fun time. All right, let's take the plastic off. So my copy is an original, or a very early repress, from the year this one came out, 1973. This was sent in the very first box that ever arrived to my P.O. box from one of you viewers. Since then, I've encountered so many kind and generous viewers, but this box will always be special. Now let's talk about this cover art. This was photographed by David Bailey, and apparently he was inspired by this hat Katharine Hepburn wore in The African Queen. It was one of these Edwardian hats with the chiffon wrapped around them and a little tie at the neck. Mick J got a pink scarf on the front. Keith got black on the back cover. Opening up the gatefold, we have the rest of the Stones in, I believe, blue, green, and yellow. It's tough to tell with such a yellow tint to the photo. And on the insert, of course, the titular Goat's Head Soup. This is a freaky shot. I kind of wish this was the cover. But this is still a great photo. It's always read as womb-like to me. On Goat's Head Soup, we have Mick Jagger on vocals, some guitar, some piano, and harmonica. Keith Richards on guitar, bass, and lead vocals on Coming Down Again. Mick Taylor on guitar and some bass. Bill Wyman on bass, and Charlie Watts on drums. We have quite a few special guests on this thing, including Ian Stewart, Nicky Hopkins, and Billy Preston on piano. Bobby Keys returns to play sax, with Jim Horn on alto sax, and Rebop of Can and Traffic contributes some percussion. Goat's Head Soup was produced by Jimmy Miller, with Andy Johns serving as chief engineer. Sorry about that. Roll transition. Once again, the Rolling Stones are embroiled in a crisis period. They really only got a year or so of breathing room before Exile on Main Street, which I do not have because every time I've seen it, it's like $40, and all the drama that went with that record. You already know the drill. Mick and Bianca and the wedding from hell, the Stones repaying their debts to the British government, then fleeing the country before they could hand over any more assets, the enduring shit show of Keith and Anita, all of it. When talking about Goat's Head Soup, it's important to note that previous album cycles had been defined by the Stones' frequent travels. The Stonesmobile had become essential to the way they made records. Parts of Sticky Fingers were recorded in Alabama. This took their already present country influence to a whole new level. Exile was split between Britain, LA, and Keith's basement in the south of France with the Stonesmobile. It really does sound like it was recorded in 3 or 4 different places. In 1972, the Stones are scattered all over. It seems having the word exile in their last album title was kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. They couldn't hold permanent residence in Britain anymore due to their tax issues, and their US visas had expired. Newlyweds Mick and Bianca, along with Charlie and his family, they stayed behind in France, while Keith and Anita flee to Switzerland from another drug bust. This was far from Keith's first rodeo as far as drug busts go. The bust in '67, that was mostly bureaucratic nonsense, but this one was real. Yeah, this is the period where drugs are really beating up the Stones, especially Keith. These years between 72 and 75 are really when the Keith Richards that we picture when we hear the name Keith Richards takes shape. While living in Switzerland, Keith is shipped off to rehab to treat his crippling heroin addiction. Here is where he wrote Angie. Is it named for his baby daughter? Is it named for David Bowie's wife? Is it both? Is it neither? It is a mystery. Mick J visited Keith at his rehab facility. Keith showed him Angie, and Mick instantly knew that the Glimmer Twins had gold on their hands. In November of '72, the globe-trotting Stones congregate once more in Jamaica. They decided on Jamaica because, well, according to Keith, it was one of the few countries left that would let all of them in. And honestly, considering all the drug busts and financial woes and a laundry list of other incidents to their name, I believe him. The band, their women, and their entourage settle into dynamic sounds in Kingston, and this is where Goat's Head Soup took shape. Jamaica was love at first sight for Keith. To this day, he's still signing statements and social media posts with One Love. He described the atmosphere at Dynamic as being a melting pot. And yet there's not a lick of reggae influence on the material that would become Goat's Head Soup. Jamaica is having a huge moment on the world stage in '73. You have records like Catch a Fire and the Harder They Come soundtrack being released that year. But the Stones really weren't paying attention to this. Instead, they gravitated towards the sounds of funk, soul, and African music. Mick J cited an almost Herbie Hancock thing with how they'd blend clavinets with Mick T's wah-wah pedal and Billy Preston's piano playing. Well, as Herbie Hancock as the Stones could get, I guess. The Stones would write in these marathon sessions. I'm talking day-long jams where they'd just hunker down and see what they could come up with. Or rather, all night. They'd work like maniacs from midnight until they crashed, usually around 10 in the morning. Winter was the first song written at Dynamic, from a riff that Mick J had been noodling around with. The lyrics came from a Beggar's Banquet era outtake called Blood Red Wine. The backing tracks for the whole record were done in just about a week, and this thing would have been finished a lot sooner had sessions not been interrupted by law enforcement proceedings for that little drug bust in France. Yeah, remember that? The other guys had to fly back for questioning, and that's where they found out there was a warrant out for Keith's arrest! Once that was smoothed over, for the time being, the Stones got back to work. The tone was feverish and hasty, despite it seeming like they had all the time in the world, but I guess you tend to work quickly if there's a chance your guitarist will have to be sent back to another country for potential incarceration. And get this, a fair amount of these songs were no more than 2 hours old before they were put to tape, and that's how they appear on the album. The track listing for Goat's Head Soup goes as follows. Opening up side 1, we have Dancing with Mr. D, followed by 100 Years Ago. Next, Coming Down Again, then Heartbreaker, and side 1 is rounded out with Angie. Opening up side 2, we have Silver Train, followed by Hide Your Love. Then Winter. Next, Can You Hear the Music? And the album is closed with Star Star. Though we will soon find out that's not its actual name. Goat's Head Soup was released on August 31st, 1973, 50 years ago this week. The release was marred by legal hell. Keith was still sorting out what went down in France. This, coupled with Mick J and Keith's previous convictions stemming from other busts in 1967 and 1970, made planning a Goat's Head Soup tour very difficult. They tour Europe in the fall, but have to skip over France because Keith is arrested again in England. What would your crime be if you were a Rolling Stone? Mine would be disturbing the peace. Critics were not crazy about this album upon release. The fan reception was lukewarm, and this material didn't stay in their set lists long at all. Now, when I started writing this video, I was wondering, does anyone know why the hell they rolled out the 50th anniversary stuff for Goat's Head Soup 3 years ago? Well, now I do. Reading Mick and Keith's interview for Rolling Stone to promote 2020 Goat's Head Soup, I realized the re-release wasn't in spite of the FFMMA, it was because of it. Looking at the state of the world in 2020, having all the Stones scattered across the world due to restrictions, I hope you know what I mean when I say that, Mick, Keith, and Charlie remembered the Stones diaspora prior to recording Goat's Head Soup. They said, we're doing this all over again. Fuck it, let's re-release Goat's Head Soup! The 2020 re-release includes a few notable outtakes. Crisscross, which was co-written by Mick J and Mick T, and a little song called Scarlet. Now, Jimmy Page and the Stones go way back. He knew Ian Stewart from their session player days, and he met the group that had yet to be named the Rolling Stones at a blues festival in the early 60s. Mick had lent Stargroves and the Stones mobile to Zeppelin in the past, see Houses of the Holy, and their soon-to-be double album excursion, Physical Goddamn Graffiti. In 1974, Mick J, Keith, Ian Stewart, Bruce Rowland, Rick Gretsch, and Jimmy Page get together in their buddy Ronnie Wood's basement. He himself is about to become a Rolling Stone as Mick T is slowly becoming fed up with everyone's shit. And hold on, Rick Gretsch. Where have I heard that name before? Oh god, ah! Similar to the main Goat's Head Soup material, Scarlet was completed in about 24 hours. The song took shape in one night. Jimmy came back the next night to put in the solos. This wasn't the first or the last time Jimmy would drop in on the Stones' affairs. See the time he waltzed into the studio to appear on One Hit to the Body in the 80s. Now, when we're talking about its legacy 50 years later, Goat's Head Soup is a weird one. It's either remembered as the finale of the Stones' gold age, or the first misstep after a golden run ending with exile. The surviving Stones seem to have disowned this one for the most part, but in the wake of the 2020 re-release, it's gotten somewhat of a re-evaluation. So, what do I think of Goat's Head Soup? So well prepared, but I also can't get out of my own way today. It's so bizarre. Going in, I'd never paid much attention to this one. I am firmly a Sticky Fingers girl, followed by Let It Bleed, and oh my god, this sets my comment section ablaze every time I say it, Their Satanic Majesty's Request. Yes, I rank Satanic Majesties over Exile on Main Street. No, I will not be taking questions at this time. This shot up my Rolling Stones ranking at a speed I never anticipated. This has a similar fractured, strung out vibe to Let It Bleed. It's no surprise to me that all three of my favorite Stones records were made in times of crisis. It seems the Stones put out some of their best work in the midst of interpersonal chaos. A quick note I wanted to make because I couldn't fit it in any section of my notes, but I feel it needs to be said. Oddly enough, even if Mick J was joking about the Herbie Hancock thing, I can hear it. I want to spotlight the unsung heroes of this era of the Stones, starting with Jimmy Miller. This is considered the Stones' golden run for a reason. He produced all those records. I want to shout out their keys players. I knew Nicky Hopkins was on this thing as soon as his part kicked in on Dancing with Mr. D. And I knew it was Billy Preston as soon as I heard Heartbreaker. And Bobby Keys. Can you imagine how naked early 70s Stones would have felt without his playing? Starting off our track-by-track breakdown with Dancing with Mr. D. Man, I love this one. The Stones have proven themselves masters of building an atmosphere, especially with an opening track. The atmosphere of Goat's Head Soup is, I don't want to say hungover, because that's so cliche. Rolling Stone used that metaphor. I think Pitchfork used it too, but they made a point. It feels like the beginning of a gritty western. Opens with that riff that starts an air-thin waif, but blossoms into just this fat, driving thing. A use of different images of temptation and death in the lyrics. The Grim Reaper, Mr. D, the devil the musician sells his soul to, the woman in a silk dress and hat. She's the Black Widow. Spider bites, poison drinks, just living is the ultimate risk here. I have to give Jimmy Miller major props for this production. The song crests about halfway through with this scream. I had to stop the song and play it back because I couldn't believe what I'd just heard. I expect something like that on a Pink Floyd record with Roger Waters and his Inhale scream, not on a Rolling Stones album. This pushes just beyond the structure of a traditional Stones song, like we're in the middle of the story as the outlaw wakes up after a night he doesn't remember where he may or may not have killed someone. 100 years ago was my holy shit, this thing is good moment. This song creeps up on you. Mick T makes my short list of truly underrated guitarists. It's Roy Buchanan, Danny Kirwan, Robin Trower, and Mick T. Once this song winds up, he blows us away with a subtle but searing solo, comparable to his work on Sway. I always make note of sequencing when I do these. I feel it's important to keep in mind when you're looking at music on the vinyl format. I don't know why I did that. So I want to point out something that totally recontextualized Heartbreaker for me, or rather two things. Coming Down Again and Angie. We seem to get some real gut punch songs with Keith on lead vocals. Coming Down Again is a slow dance as the world is burning. This song is worn ragged, a reflection on the narrator's own circumstances. For a song like this, you've got to keep in mind how heroin beat up rock and roll. Coming Down Again is an ode to the rock and rollers who have been killed or otherwise taken out by heroin. A simple line like "Where are all my friends" is loaded when you put the song in this context. It's both the waking up after a raucous, destructive party to find everyone has split, leaving you all the mess to clean up, and it's calling everyone you know for a lifeline when you're on the brink and all you get is a dial tone. There aren't many real friends in rock and roll. The genuine souls get brutalized and devoured. The saxophone adds to that slow dance intimacy. If we were dancing with the devil on track 1, we're cradling his head on our shoulder by now. After that, we have Heartbreaker. Without Coming Down Again before it, it's another Stones rocker, but with that song before. You just have this awful pit in your stomach the whole time. This one is a seamless blend of the Stones' newfound funk influence with their blues roots. Thank you, Billy Preston. Coming Down Again is about heroin ravaging rock and roll. Heartbreaker is about heroin and violence at the hands of police ravaging the black community, specifically in New York City. Mick howls of violence and drugs tearing your world apart. His attitude and ferocity is on full display. This is such a contrast to such a slick instrumental. And Charlie's shuffle underneath and cymbal over top the manic doo 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 has Sympathy for the Devil written all over it. Then closing out side one, we have Angie. Never mind who it was named for, and never mind that it was a terrible choice for a lead single. It does plod, but as it does, it blossoms. Personally, I've gone back and forth on this one. I see why it was a #1 single over here in the States, but it's not as effective as Wild Horses or Moonlight Mile. I think that's because Angie is a little too much of itself. Too long, too twinkly, too saccharine. It's fairly straightforward, but then you catch your thumb on this thorn of a line. Ain't it good to be alive? So far, in a lot of ways, Goat's Head Soup was starting to feel like an anti-Sticky Fingers. That is, until the curious case of Goat's Head Soup Side 2. It starts off with Silver Train. It's far from the Stones' best country rock moment, but it's also far from the worst. It's repetitive as hell. Couldn't Mick have figured out anything else to play on the harmonica? This wheeze gets grating after 20 go-arounds. For the life of me, I can't figure out why Hide Your Love was included and not, say, Crisscross. Again, it's a fine blues moment, but we're spinning our wheels in the mud. It's a fun jam with a good Mick T solo, but then there's another 3 minutes. I only found myself enjoying this song while I was making dinner and it was background music. I'm not sure I could actively listen to this one for 4 whole minutes. Moments like these make me wish they'd spent more than a few hours on these songs. I have been waiting the whole video to talk about this song. You guys, I have a new favorite Rolling Stones song. Listen, I love Jumpin' Jack Flash, it's my song, and I love Sway and Moonlight Mile. I'd never heard Goat's Head Soup besides the hits. I had the pleasure of uncovering one of the great Rolling Stones hidden gems for myself for the first time. I heard Winter. When I first heard this one, I did something that I never do. I stopped and I restarted it. Then I replayed it. Then I replayed it again. The riff is strangely modern. It sounds like a guitar line Death Cab for Cutie would use on Transatlanticism 30 years after this. I want to make note that this song was reworked from a Beggar's Banquet outtake. Who was with Mick in '68? That's right, Marianne Faithfull. Sometimes I Cry About You is telling. He regrets how he treated her and groveled like hell in Wild Horses. Years later, newly married, he still feels guilty. Singing of a long, hard winter right to a long, hot summer, we get no repose here. A desolate winter after Christmas, only fleeting mentions of spring and brown, drought-stricken crops. Charlie scooping up the beat halfway through to pluck the tops off those heart-wrenching string swells. Mick T delivers this solo that breaks through the ice and dives back underwater. Oh, I love you! I'll wrap my coat around your shoulders, even if I get frostbite. I die to keep you warm. I burn a candle for you. It won't keep me alive, but I carry a torch for you. Oh my god! This song is devastatingly beautiful. I've uncovered a lost gem of the Stones catalog. Can You Hear the Music is curious. It's eclectic, unlike anything else I've heard before or since, especially from a bluesy rock and rolling group. This guitar sounds like it takes some inspiration from Queen. You know, maybe this song could have worked with some different songs on this side of the record, but with the batch we got, it feels jagged and rough. And finally, Starfucker, the original intended title of Star Star. What the fuck? I love telling men that groupies and starfuckers are different things and watching them totally melt down, just smoke and sparks flying out of their ears. They cannot handle the nuances of groupie culture, and I take glee in it. The Stones really shot themselves in the foot with this as the album closer. It's a cheap shot, a cheap attempt at being edgy. Like, come on guys, you do that well enough on your own. Zeppelin would do the groupie song album closer so much better with Sick Again. I can't help but wonder if they saw this slip up and went, alright, good idea, bad execution. Through this era of the Stones, the MVP title was really traded back and forth between both guitarists. Keith really pulled through in Brian's absence on Let It Bleed, while Sticky Fingers is Mick T's glittering studio album debut. In absence of another Rolling Stone Bill was checking out during Goat's Head production, Keith steps up to the plate and plays the majority of the bass. He had these inventive riffs. He has a great way of shifting a chord slightly off balance to give an otherwise run-of-the-mill tune a wonderful atmosphere about it. The best example would be his riff sparking the insidious tension on Gimme Shelter back in '69, but he displays that finger on the pulse quality here on Goat's Head Soup too. For the life of me, I can't figure out why Goat's Head Soup isn't held in such high regard as Let It Bleed or even Sticky Fingers. Sure, it's flawed, the lows are low, but the highs, Winter, these are soaring highs of their golden run. Beggar's Banquet, Let It Bleed, Sticky Fingers, Exile. This is the most overlooked. 50 years later, Goat's Head Soup is still an odd one. Though you can make connections to other Stones records, there's still nothing quite like it before or since. They haven't gotten this experimental since Satanic Majesties. This is also their first album of all original material since then. This is the most eclectic their influences have been since then. This album is a snapshot of the band as they're embarking down from the mountaintop. This is a band living life on the edge, and they truly have nothing left to lose, so why not put out a record like this? This was a huge risk to take. There are misses, but the hits make the risk well worth the reward. 50 years later, Goat's Head Soup is a forgotten gem of the Rolling Stones catalog, and as selfish as it is, I kinda hope it doesn't get dug up by the masses. My personal favorites off this one are Dancing with Mr. D, 100 Years Ago, Coming Down Again, Heartbreaker, and Winter. Remember, if you want to keep up with all of my favorites from all of the Vinyl Mondays, I have a Spotify playlist linked in my description. I update it every week. And that's it. That was Goat's Head Soup 50 years later, and the last regular episode before the Vinyl Monday Season 2 finale. What do you think of this album? What do you think of the Rolling Stones? Leave a comment letting me know. I love hearing what you guys have to say about albums I love. And if you like what I do here, you should like this video and subscribe to my channel. I post new episodes of Vinyl Monday every Monday morning at 11. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next week for